What is up, you guys? Welcome to Illumination Lab. My name is Justin, and today we'll be going over this living room space I made in C4D. So just like with the dining room set, my goal today is to walk through my process, show the references I use, and ultimately how I constructed this project as a whole. So without further delay, let's get into it. Alright, so references. So like the last video, I actually used this reference on my left to set up the dining room. I think I actually said it last time, but I actually really liked the windows and all the light that it brings into the scene. So with trying out a living room, I wanted something a little bit different, something that actually brought in quite a bit of light. And then eventually, over time, I can actually make it a little bit more dynamic by having a backyard with a swimming pool and all that good stuff. So I thought it'd be pretty cool, so I wanted to give it a shot. The biggest thing I was a little bit worried about was I didn't know how much my system could handle as far as rendering, how much I can actually get away with without having any error codes pop up for Redshift. I put a couple of my renders here on the right. I think I did a really good job of capturing similar elements to the reference here, but still creating something a little bit new or a little bit different to actually just make it my own. I did try to utilize a similar color palette to the actual reference. I did change a little bit, as you can see, with the couch and the beams as well too. Also too, when we're looking at the reference here, the reference has amazing detail put into it, and so I did have to unfortunately not put in a lot of detail just to make sure that, you know, Redshift can actually render this. I did a similar look to it, however, I don't think it really captures the completeness to the reference. With starting this project, I actually started with primitives, so I used these squares, lined them up like such, and then I ended up putting additional squares in to act as the beams. Then I scaled the squares all the way up the wall, similar to the reference here, and then here I actually took a picture of a work in progress of it. So I wanted to establish the beam at first to kind of give me an idea of where I'm going to start and end these squares. Also too, if I could go back and redo the process, I think I was a little too quick with adding the glass to the actual windows, and I felt like that kind of slowed down the process. But I feel like I tend to apply either the textures or the colors just so I can kind of get an idea of what I'm working with, but I do think that kind of slows down the process. So I think in next projects I'll try to do just basic primitives as much as I can, and then later on add in the really nice textures and materials and all that good stuff. But now that I remember back, I think mainly I put all the details and the colors there because I don't want to get too crazy with the project and make it extra hyper realistic when I eventually can't render it because it's just too much within the given scene. So I feel like there's good aspects of that where I can kind of play around with the materials and see what I can get away with, but at the same time too, I feel like it does delay the process a little bit. This is another screenshot. I believe this one was about 3 hours in. As you could see, I started to put the floor in, put in the walls. I started to do the ceiling. In the reference there, I think you can slightly see the ceiling, but it really doesn't have too much to it. So I thought it'd be pretty interesting to put in these different light fixtures here and then have a little bit of plants draping down from it. So I think it added a little bit to it, but still kept it true to kind of that same theme we're trying to go for. Now with all these plants, I actually get these plants from Quixel Bridge. What's really important to know is with these assets that you pull in, you actually have to pull up the material and turn off luminance completely, and then I'll go over to the global scale and I'll usually bring that down to about 50%, and same with all these others. And I don't know why it loads in like this. Maybe it wasn't optimized for Redshift specifically, but this is an extra step you will have to do for a few different materials, but mainly different plants. So for the lighting in the living room, I used the dome lights. As you can see, this is where all the clouds is coming from, is from the actual dome light that I used. And then I did use a area light for the top lights here, and then I put them into a cylindrical cone and then adjusted it as needed. Then when I went to do the initial render of it, I believe I did use a area light as well behind the camera just to kind of fill in a little bit more light into the scene. Now looking at the final result of the living room, most of this was just done using, again, just primitives, more beginner friendly essentially. So with looking at these final renders here, I'll just kind of go through the process of what I did. With the couch, again, I kept it very simple, just used primitives. I played around with the fillet radius just to round off those edges, and then once I got it to a point that I actually thought would look good, I applied that to a few other of these squares, and then finally added in this fabric texture to the couch. Now if I could go back and redo this, I think I would add a lot more detail to the couch. However, with playing around with it, I had to make some sacrifices somewhere to get it to actually render, and so I felt like even though the couch is one of the bigger pieces of the living room, unfortunately I had to take some shortcuts on it, so the couch was the one that was sacrificed. So with the coffee table was just imported from the Cinema4D library. Of course, they have tons of really cool 3D assets that you could kind of pop in and customize yourself. So I threw in the coffee table. Same with everything else on this table here, the books, the little mugs as well too. I just threw that onto the coffee table. Big tip on doing this, make sure that you're actually aware of where the asset is. There has been a couple times where, you know, I felt like I set the mug or the book on the table, but it was actually floating like an inch off of the table. So just make sure to take that little extra time just so you're not wasting more of that time later on down the road. So with the carpet, again, another very simple thing, just threw in a square, brought it down so it was just very thin, and then added a carpet texture, and so I just threw that on top. Pretty simple. Again, I would love to add in more detail to it, but you know, anything with the texture like that just eats up a lot of memory. So, but I did throw it in there to kind of be a little bit more similar to that reference picture that did have a carpet as well too. I think the hardest part when it comes to the living room was actually the staircase for me. I knew I wanted a staircase, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with it. I did see some different references like these that were actually pretty cool. I really like the idea of putting more plants underneath. If I could go back, I probably wouldn't do another glass material because I just didn't realize at the time how long that would take as far as rendering goes. Yeah, it looks pretty cool, but depending on different projects and such, it does eat up a lot of time. Some other ideas I had were to maybe do a couple different statues and maybe some rocks with some pretty cool marble to kind of match the rest of the house that I did here, to kind of have that duality between the marble and the wood. Another thing I would go back and change is, since I had to do the house in multiple different scenes and I had to bring it together, I think a big opportunity for me is the scaling. Did have to try to readjust the scaling when I brought all of it together. So that was probably the hardest part between all of it, was to scale it so it all looks to about the same scale. So if you are to make a project like that, I would say that is something to definitely look out for. Make sure that you take either the extra time to kind of scale it out. With me, I was just having fun with it. I was just trying to throw in what I can. So with some of these renders, you could kind of tell that the scale is a little bit off, but for any major projects or anything, or professional projects, just make sure it is to scale so it's a little bit more cohesive. And then surprisingly, the very last thing I did to complete the living room was actually this chair. I really didn't know what I wanted to do for the chair. Again, in the reference piece that I use, it has a really cool looking leather chair to it. I was actually looking on CG Trader, and there's this really cool asset here, so I just thought, why not plug it in. Doesn't really go with the scene too much as far as like the style of the chair, but I thought it was pretty cool, and I would like to support that artist. So I downloaded it, brought it in here, and thought it really helped out with finishing the living room. So with the animation in total, I think it took me about 196 hours to fully render, and so I think the biggest time eater here was, of course, the windows. The windows was something that I definitely wanted. I didn't know how long it would actually take to render, so I have a 3080 Ti that I'm using for Redshift, so I thought it would be a little bit quicker than it was, but I think I averaged about an hour and a half to 2 hours per frame. So there was some spots in this animation where I did have to cut corners a little bit just to save on time, but I ended up liking it. I wish I could add in a little bit more frames to kind of make the animation a little bit smoother. There are some spots like this one here that is a little bit more jittery, so maybe if I put in another 100 hours into it, I can make it a little bit more smooth, a little bit more realistic. So overall, I had a lot of fun with it. I thought it was pretty cool trying to find out different angles to set up the camera and how to move the camera. For the first initial animation here, I turned the camera to focus on the painting here. What's a really cool tip here is, usually with anything using a area light, doesn't really have a hard time rendering that. So if you can throw in some pictures, if you are doing a house, and use an area light, that can help out with rendering times. And on the opposite side here, with the frosted glass and the plants, so I have the windows in the back here, the frosted glass, and then of course the plants here. They all take a long time with rendering. So with that, I had to find a couple good shots and then in post create a transition effect to kind of help with reducing time with the animation, but still giving you guys an idea of what the whole living room looks like. And that's about it, you guys. I had a lot of fun doing this. You know, if you guys have any questions, feel free to throw it down in the comments. I'll reply back to you here. But I'm excited for this next part of the project. I think next I'm going to do the hallway and the front entrance. I think actually in this animation here, you kind of got a sneak peek of it. So I'm going to work on getting that out here soon. Make sure to like and subscribe. It helps me out quite a bit. I'm going to continue to work on this house project here, but if there's something that you want to see or you have questions on, you know, feel free to let me know. But other than that, this is the living room and I'm excited for next time. Have a good one, you guys.